More people are moving out of our area.
$100,000 does not get you very far in New York City.
There is no denying it costs an arm and a leg to live in New York City.
New York just saw the largest population decline of all 50 states. People are moving out in record numbers. Fox 5 recently did a report where they showed the population percentage decrease by state, and New York has the largest population decline of all states, reflected in dark orange, which means that it had a decrease of 0.5% or more. On the other hand, tourism is booming thanks to cool attractions like this one and all the others. The New York City Tourism and Conventions Bureau recently did a report that said in 2024, we're going to expect 69 million visitors this year. That is up about 6 million from last year, 2023, which is up tremendously over the years previous. So it seems like this decline is really only affecting residents. Why is that? As someone who's lived in New York State my entire life and who recently moved out of New York City, these facts really intrigue me. Why are other people moving? Are they moving for the same reasons that I felt like I needed to move? So I decided to investigate. I found an interesting study done by USA Today where they interviewed all different types of people who left New York City, and surprisingly, or not surprisingly, I don't know, you be the judge of that, the #1 reason people left New York is for a better quality of life. Quality of life can be a lot of different factors. One of the biggest ones happened to be space, which makes sense. The average New York City apartment is about 866 square feet and costs $3,400. Meanwhile, the average home in the US is about 2,014 feet and costs significantly less than that. So essentially, people are being forced to live in extremely small spaces with astronomical rents. What could be worse than living in a small space with astronomical rents? Well, it could be the space is not well maintained, and that's one of the news reports I've been seeing a lot lately too, is that there's these older buildings that haven't been taken care of and they're actually starting to collapse. And if you just take a look around the city today, it's not uncommon to see these buildings that just don't look like they're in the absolute best condition. In fact, you're constantly seeing construction being done to fix them. A lot of these landlords are not taking care of the properties, yet they're still charging astronomically high prices, and people are living in squalor.
Now getting the address 57 N Street between William and Nassau. An explosion in a parking garage was collapsed.
So of course they're looking for a better quality of life. I don't blame them. That's kind of one of the reasons that I moved out of the city. It was just too cramped, especially if you have a family. Only 27% of New Yorkers even have kids. This is just not a place that is easy to have kids in because of the space and the daycare costs, and that's a whole other conversation.
Our highway's falling apart too.
Our highways are falling apart? That's a new one to me.
Known as the Brooklyn Promenade. But after years of wear and tear and illegally overweight trucks, much of the road is beginning to disintegrate.
Another thing about quality of life, you can't get anywhere. Traffic is terrible everywhere. It takes forever. So essentially, if you're living in a building, it could collapse. And if you're driving around the city, the street could also collapse. Cool. Sounds fun. Money, of course. That's one of the major reasons that I left. Everything costs so much more money here. This is the most expensive city in the world. From cost of living, to food, to just regular activities, to taxes. We have a city tax in addition to a state tax, in addition to the federal tax. So you're hit with 3 taxes here. I mean, just stepping outside of your apartment, it feels like the second your foot hits the pavement, $100. There was a recent study done by a company called Smart Asset, and they compared what a $100,000 salary would get you in all of the major cities in the US. And guess which city was dead last in what a $100,000 salary would get you? Guess how much a $100,000 salary gets you in New York City? $30,000, that's what Smart Asset said. After cost of living and all of the other things factored in, it's about equivalent of having a $30,000 salary in cheaper places. You do get paid more, but still, like, it doesn't it doesn't balance out as much as people think. Like, you know, if you're living, I don't know, in some cheaper place in the US, right? $100,000 salary sounds really good. Here though, some people even say $100,000 salary makes you poor.
Parul Jain is an associate professor of finance and economics at Rutgers Business School.
I think for New York City, 100 grand would make you pretty poor.
The median salary in New York City is $73,000 a year. The average salary is in the 50s. And they're saying $100,000 salary makes you $30,000? Imagine what it's like if you're one of the majority that makes significantly below that. I mean, you are living paycheck to paycheck. I went on smartasset.com's salary calculator, which is super fun, by the way, and I highly recommend everyone do it because I literally played around with it for like half an hour. If we're taking the median salary in New York City, which is $73,000, that is equal after federal, New York State, and New York City tax to $56,840 per year. So you technically pocket $4,736 per month. But if you remember, earlier I said the average rent here in the city is $3,400 per month, right? So if you take that and subtract it by your monthly pay at a $73,000 salary, you are only left with $1,336 left, which would be living 100% paycheck to paycheck here, given the fact that a typical meal out is gonna cost you significantly over $50 most likely, if you're going to like a restaurant. Now, if you're grabbing a bagel to go, which is a great choice by the way, that's like $5. Totally doable. But like, do you really want to feel like you're living paycheck to paycheck when you're making $73,000 a year? I see why people leave the city because it's infuriating. I mean, you feel like you shouldn't be feeling this broke, you know what I mean? That's a good salary. You should not be feeling broke at that salary. Meanwhile, if you had that exact salary in Austin, Texas, you would make an additional $5,580 per year because of no state tax or city tax, and then everything else is way cheaper. So you'd pocket like $2,000 to $3,000 a month instead of $1,000 a month. I don't know, you be the judge of it. I see why people are leaving. You know what I mean? A lot of jobs today actually can be done from anywhere. If you have a remote job, like my husband does, why would you live in New York City where your dollar goes less when you could live outside of the city and get that same amount of money without having to pay New York City tax or any of the premium costs? If you can work from anywhere, you might as well do it. Like, I can work from this coffee shop, which is amazing, by the way. If you haven't been to Spongy's, this is like one of my favorite places in Chinatown. Best sponge cakes. Get the original. I'm obsessed with them. And that's the beauty of remote work. And a lot of people now are able to have that job flexibility, possibly work fully remote. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. If you can work remote or have flexible work schedule, you might as well move outside of the city, get a larger space at a cheaper price without paying the New York City tax. It's a win-win for everyone. Inflation is rising faster than salaries. This is actually something we're seeing across the entire US, not even New York based. However, it's particularly difficult in New York when you're already feeling that tightness in your wallet because your cost of living is so high and your salary is not matching it. According to the US inflation calculator, the last 3 years have had inflation increase more than any of the previous years. So hopefully this gets under control soon because this is not helping the situation at all. Safety has also been a major concern and one of the reasons some people have left the city. Now in 2023, there were so many reports in the news of crime in the city. You saw that all over the place. However, it's actually lower than it was during COVID. When you look at the data, it's important to analyze the actual numbers because I thought that was a little surprising. I'm like, really? Is it actually lower than it was during COVID? Yes and no. So in certain categories, it is lower, but other categories are up, like assaults are up, right? And that's a scary one to be up. Looking into this data, what we actually learned is that crime has increased significantly on subways, and that's why we see a lot more cops, you know, there's entire police stations in subways. They've been here the whole time, but now they just have more cops running around. And reports of crazy things happening, like people being randomly stabbed, people being pushed in front of trains. It's really no wonder that people want to leave the city to kind of avoid those things, because even myself sometimes, you know, like I have a rule where I don't get on the subway after 10 p.m. It's just like probably a no-go, you know what I mean? And even then, like every time you enter the subway, it's just like not an enjoyable experience. Delayed trains, homelessness, people with mental health issues. But on the other hand, most New Yorkers have no choice but to take the subway because taking a car service around the city is extremely expensive. So of course people are leaving because they have no other option to get around. You know, take the subway, risk your life, or pay for an expensive car service. I get the dilemma, I really do. So after looking at all this data and doing all this research, I've come to the conclusion that I think in the future, New York City may be a place that's more for visitors than residents, which is kind of crazy for me as someone who's lived in New York City my whole life. It's almost like New York City is becoming like a Disneyland in a way. It's a vacation destination. The data certainly suggests it. There is so much more about New York City you need to know though. I have videos on all different types of topics, restaurants, things to do, bars, scams, tips, you name it, we've made the video. Check them out right here. I'll see you next time. Bye.